Good morning, everybody. It's just lovely to hear all the chatter in the room. I'm sure there are old friendships being reconnected and new ones being made even at this early hour. I'm glad you've managed to dodge whichever tractors may or may not be outside and make it through the rain. A very good morning and warm welcome to the 2024 APCC NPCC Summit in collaboration with the College of Policing. I'm Julie Etchingham. It's very nice to be back again, having joined you here last year. I'm going to take you through the next couple of days. And for many of you, I'm aware it is very difficult to break away from your day-to-day duties after another incredibly hectic year. But I hope that you'll find that it is good to step back a little, join colleagues, hear from some key voices who have a direct impact on the way all of you work. We're thrilled to have representatives here from every police force in England and Wales and their police and crime commissioners. This year, everyone is in the room, no one's joining online, and there are 450 delegates, making this the biggest summit yet. We're very grateful too for all the sponsors of the event, in particular our platinum headline sponsor, Deloitte. And we really hope you'll take some time during the coffee breaks and lunch, etc., to visit and chat to the many exhibitors in the Pickwick space upstairs. There are 35 different stands for you to visit. Companies, charities, innovation specialists, do go and say hi to them over the next couple of days during the breaks. It's where you can get a cup of coffee later too. It's important to add too that the event is open to the media. There are a variety of journalists in the room and listening in to some of the speeches a little later. Before we get going, just need to give you a few practical bits of information. First of all, on safety, and the centre has a short message for us, so they'll play it now.
Welcome to the QE2 Centre. Please take a moment to listen to the following safety message. There is no planned fire drill taking place today. In the event of an alarm, please leave the building immediately via your nearest fire exit. Further instructions will be given at the time. Please make your event organiser aware if you require assistance. Once outside, you should disperse away from the building and await further information from your event organiser. Thank you for listening and enjoy your event.
So that's the voice of God setting us straight on safety. Just a few more details on that. If the alarm sounds and you are asked to leave the building, you're asked to gather at the rear of the venue at the entrance to St James's Park, and an email will be sent out to everyone to advise on when and if you can regain access to the building, and a fire warden and a member of our team will be at the meeting point to advise you in person of the situation. So that's the health and safety, very important message to start off the event. Now, just a few words about how we're going to engage with one another during the conference. First of all, the key to all of it is the Summit app. You can access it, if you haven't already, by scanning the QR code on your name badge. In that app, you'll find details of the programme, biographies of the speakers and photographs, plus details of which rooms sessions will be held in, particularly useful for those breakout sessions when we'll be separating out. And a quick word on the name badges. Please can you wear your delegate badge at all times, but do remember to remove them if you leave the conference centre for very obvious reasons. We're on social media. You can tweet or X or Insta about it under hashtag PoliceConf24. It's also on your badges as a reminder. And you may remember, if you were here last year, we're using the Slido platform for you to ask questions of our speakers and panels. I'm really keen that you engage as much as possible on this. So keep sending me your questions and comments throughout the day to put to our panels. You can access Slido on the Summit app. And as well as submitting questions, you can like questions, so I get an idea of which the popular ones are, so I can put them to the top of my list. And also make sure that you select the right room for your session. This one is Churchill for the main sessions, but select the appropriate breakout room if you're joining a session there, the Gielgud room, or the Burton and Redgrave room for a bit of drama if you're attending the sessions there. Also on Slido, a short survey at the end of each day and a survey about the summit as a whole. The organisers are really keen to know what you think of what worked and what perhaps didn't. And of course, as well as taking questions from Slido, delighted to take them from the floor. Just put your hand up, we'll get a microphone to you. If you could just kindly introduce yourself before you put your question, that would be great. We're planning to live stream some of the sessions. They'll also be recorded. You'll be able to access the recordings on the Summit app for about 24 hours after the session if there's anything you wish to recap or relive your moments of glory when you've asked a question or you've been on the panel. So before we begin, from my perspective, and that's usually from a newsroom, of course, it's clearly been a year of massive change and upheaval, which very often has seen policing at the sharp end. Whether once again around public demonstrations, there'll be, of course, police out on the square today, the safety of politicians in a general election year, a change of government, all that might mean, both in funding and policy change, and then the atrocity, of course, of Southport and the riots which followed. None of us doubt the pressure you are under day to day, and none of us underestimate the potential pressures to come as you all try to adapt policing for a new era of technological advance and seemingly unending global upheaval. Some of you might remember I mentioned last year I have a dear friend who's a police officer with the Met, and she has been working on policing some of the most appalling child abuse online in the past couple of years. A case she'd been working on for a very long time, the harrowing details after its conclusion, some of which she shared with me, finally came to a successful conviction, seeing the perpetrator jailed. It was a personal triumph for her, having navigated the case for so long and which had really taken its toll on her. For the past 20 years, she's given me an insight into her job and a deep appreciation of it. I know many of you in this room will have your own personal stories like hers, which might never make the headlines, but few of them come without total dedication and no little personal cost. So just like last year, I have her very much in mind when I'm spending the next day or two listening to all of you and helping facilitate some of the conversations. So it's with all that in mind that the title of this year's summit feels entirely apt: Global Risks and Local Responses, Positive Policing for the Future. We have a whole host of extraordinary speakers, not least the Home Secretary, with some big announcements on the future and reform of policing, some of which you may have seen in the press this morning. In a moment, we'll hear from the Chair of the NPCC, Gavin Stevens, and the new Chair of the APCC, Emily Spurrell. But first, we've got a short video to whet our appetite and start us all thinking about some of the key discussions that we have ahead.
The last 12 months have presented policing and communities across the UK with significant challenges. Forces have had to react as the impact of global events has been regularly reflected on our streets, and we have seen how the rapid spread of misinformation has required a robust public order policing response. Much of policing's work is visible to the public. That inevitably brings with it increased scrutiny, with messages shared on social media within moments, and a demand for answers. Police and crime commissioners are there to provide independent scrutiny of police practices and performance, to drive up standards for the public. An effective policing response is crucial. Crime is constantly evolving and criminals becoming increasingly sophisticated, so policing must continually develop and adapt to keep people safe. Forces are looking into new ways of working, adopting new technology and utilising data to successfully target offenders, crime types and emerging trends. Policing cannot solve all of the challenges alone. Many of the issues are also those faced by wider society. And engagement with and being representative of the public it serves is ever more important. Working in partnership with all of our communities and with other organisations is key to the sector's continued effectiveness and to improving public trust and confidence. By working together, we can strengthen and innovate. And as we look to the future, we must continue to embrace necessary change to deal with an increasingly complex criminal landscape.
So just a short video there to touch on some of the subject areas that we'll be getting stuck into over the course of the summit. So without further ado, for her opening remarks, please welcome Emily Spurrell, the new chair of the APCC.
Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the APCC NPCC Summit. As has been said, this is my first summit as chair, and I'm very proud to be opening this event alongside NPCC Chair Gavin Stevens. So I took up the position of chair after two of the most incredibly difficult months for the region that I serve. On the 29th of July, South Butt and the wider Merseyside region was rocked by the devastating knife attack, which saw three young girls, Elsie, Alice and Bibi, lose their lives. Three beautiful little girls, dancing, smiling, having fun, right where they belonged with their friends, until unspeakable horror unfolded. In the days that followed, we saw their tragic deaths being used to fuel division and hatred. We saw misinformation and lies being peddled, and as a result, we saw utterly appalling scenes of disorder on our streets. That racism and violence which spread online and across the country instilled fear and division within our communities and presented huge challenges for policing. But the police response was swift, decisive and brave. And I want to pay tribute to the thousands of officers who risked their own safety, many suffering injuries and trauma to protect people and property. In Merseyside, officers who had run towards danger on the day of that stabbing, dealing with the most unspeakable scenes of suffering, were back on shift the next day facing bricks and bottles. And they were supported by a huge number of police staff who gave up their rest days to ensure that there was the right response for our communities. I was also incredibly proud of the way the communities came together in defiance of those who sought to divide them, cleaning up the streets, repairing damage to the local mosque, checking in with neighbours and offering support to local officers. But it's important that we reflect on how we can address the underlying causes of this disorder, how we can target the dangerous and malicious individuals directing and coordinating activity on and offline to incite hatred and violence. How can we prevent those scenes from ever playing out on our streets again? In common with the themes of our conference, we need to acknowledge the increasing impact that bad actors, false claims, misogyny, racism, disinformation and inflammatory language have in radicalising vulnerable people and provoking violence and disorder in our communities. And it's not just faceless individuals or covert state forces that are responsible. Dangerous rhetoric from high-profile figures of all kinds helps to fuel and can falsely legitimise violence. This is a serious problem and one that we need to urgently address as a society. As police leaders, we have a responsibility to call out irresponsible behaviour, inflammatory language and lies circulated on social media. We have seen just how easily that can lead to widespread criminality. The theme of our summit, Global Risks and Local Responses, Positive Policing for the Future, is such a vital topic because we're all committed to making policing not just better today, but for the future. It's important to acknowledge the progress is being made, but at times it is variable and too slow. Working together, we must demonstrate a commitment to increasing the pace of change across the sector, driving improvements so that we can deliver a better service to the public. The new government has arrived with an ambitious agenda for reform, an ambition that is shared by policing leaders to think differently and to challenge the status quo. We can only do that if we are willing to work collaboratively, recognise the need for compromise and, crucially, follow the evidence of what will genuinely improve services for the public. And data and performance will be key to this agenda and will be crucial to driving up standards, and we'll be hearing more about that from the Home Secretary later. As a sector, we need to ask difficult questions and be prepared to think radically. We will talk a lot over the next 2 days about change and where and how we can make the biggest impact. PCCs respond to local issues and community concerns on crime and policing, and it is telling that some of the most impactful innovations have started locally before being rolled out nationally. Operation Pegasus addressing retail crime and Operation Soteria tackling rape and serious sexual assault, as well as hotspot policing addressing serious violence and antisocial behaviour, to name just a few. Proposals for reform need to recognise that a one-size-fits-all approach will rarely be the right solution, but scaling up approaches that demonstrably work is in all of our interests. As PCCs, we are committed and ready to work together with our policing partners to achieve purposeful change, that will make a real and lasting difference to policing and criminal justice outcomes and improve the public's experience of policing. Building trust and confidence is key. As PCC for Merseyside, I know the legacy of distrust that persists 34 years on from the Hillsborough tragedy. The Right Reverend James Jones, former Bishop of Liverpool, who chaired the Hillsborough Independent Panel, set out very clearly in his landmark report how the bereaved family's lasting pain and suffering was only compounded by the persistent lies and cover-up that followed. And the government has committed to introducing a new Hillsborough law to Parliament by the spring. We await to see the details in the bill, but we support a duty of candour in policing and the wider public sector, and we are ready to work with the NPCC and the government to explore how a new legal duty of candour on public services can improve and increase public trust and confidence. But a change in law will only go so far. Building trust and confidence must start from within, ensuring the right culture in all police forces and improving the response to victims. And important steps have been taken. Police vetting has been improved, and the historical data wash is set to become a continuous process. The new Crime Stoppers service for the public to anonymously report police corruption and abuse is live. The Police Race Action Plan was developed. A new Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls framework to give women confidence to report. And the College of Policing's new Code of Ethics has been produced. But there is much more to be done. More to ensure that when a person calls the police, they answer. And when someone is in need, the police arrive every time. More to protect women and girls from violence, to ensure that they are safe and feel safe in their homes and on our streets. More to improve the relationship with black communities so they don't feel over-policed. And we need a justice system that works for victims, where they feel believed and supported. We must ensure that the Victims' Code of Practice reflects those needs and that partners and agencies are delivering against it. Not just to the letter, but providing a quality service for victims to build their confidence in what can be a frightening and confusing system, and when they are often at their most vulnerable. And we have to move away from an over-reliance on custodial sentences for non-violent offences. Our prisons are at capacity, and we know that short sentences too often create a revolving door of crime, with people cycling in and out of custody rather than tackling the root causes of their offending. As well as addressing capacity in the prison estate, we need to make the case for a better use of community sentences that challenge offenders to turn their lives around, as well as out-of-court resolutions and rehabilitative justice when victims want them to. PCCs are instrumental to addressing these challenges. Our unique capacity to convene partners within and outside of policing and criminal justice, health, education and business enables us to identify potential problems at an early stage and act to help tackle the underlying causes of some of society's biggest challenges. PCCs are the voice of the public in policing. Our role is key to delivering on public and government policing priorities, prevention and rehabilitation, combating violence against women and girls, tackling drug-related crime, ending the tragedy of knife crime, ridding our communities of the scourge of antisocial behaviour, and better supporting the victims of crime. PCCs are also critical to delivering on the devolution and localism agenda. By advocating for local communities, delivering on what they want through local police and crime plans, and holding Chief Constable to account for their delivery, PCCs provide critical oversight and represent the views of the people that they serve. The success of many of the projects delivered by PCCs is testimony to what local insight and devolved powers can achieve. But their continued success is dependent on sustainable and equitable funding that matches our ambitions and enables longer-term decision-making. And this is true across policing. We welcome the government's commitment to increase community policing, but we also know that crime is increasingly global, technologically enabled, and rapidly evolving. We need to be ready and equipped to tackle these new and burgeoning threats, and we need to improve forces' capabilities in forensics and cyber and harness the benefits that new technology affords us in combating crime of all kinds. Above all, we need to work together. We accept that the challenges are great and ever-changing. But together we can meet future needs and public expectations by seizing the opportunity the government's focus on policing and criminal justice system reform provides. While we have differing roles and may sometimes disagree, we're all committed to the same goal: safer, stronger communities. For the sake of families like those of Elsie, BB and Alice's, and for all of our victims and communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And now, as you can see, Gavin Stevens, Chair of the NPCC.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning all and a very warm welcome. It's great to be back here with you again at an event that's been organised alongside the College of Policing and with the invaluable support of the sponsors and exhibitors who make all of this possible. As we've just seen in the video and heard from Emily, a lot can happen in a year. Operation Navette was the policing response to the violent disorder that took place this summer. A policing response that we're proud of. In the face of ferocious attacks, officers, staff and volunteers displayed their utmost bravery and professionalism. Rest days were cancelled, holidays missed, with mutual aid provided across the nations at little to no notice. The strength of policing was noticed and appreciated. Collaborative working, rapid investigations, swift justice led to the relatively quick restoration of order and acted as a deterrent to others. Another aspect of the response that's not received the attention it deserves was the interruption of the messaging, tackling the misinformation that was propagating harm. This had an international dimension that brought fear and destruction to our streets, demonstrating the real-world consequences of online hatred. Helped by the communities that took a stand against the violence, we succeeded in our mission. But those intensive 2 weeks highlighted some weaknesses in our capabilities. It was difficult, in an age of mass communication, to identify real risk of violence amongst a large volume of threatening material that had the potential for widespread impact across the country. This made it harder to get resources in the right place, at the right time, and access the information needed to inform decisions at speed. Put simply, the absence of strong national capabilities put more strain on the local response. It also exposed a lack of clarity between local and national accountability and the parameters of operational independence in response to national threats. The violent disorder of the summer was an example of how global threats affect local security. The lessons learned could equally apply to a range of other policing challenges, from cybercrime to human trafficking, fraud to criminal action designed to disrupt and disable businesses. Fortunately, never before have chief constables, police leaders and government been so united in the view that to protect our communities locally from global threats, policing needs to change. The next 2 days are a real opportunity to start this conversation on how we do that, to ensure that we do. Before we delve into what that conversation might cover, I'm really keen to make sure that we centre any discussion around our communities, the very reason we're all here today. If you were here last year, you'll already know that I grew up in Hartlepool, a place of great pride in the heart of the North East. In the late 70s and early 80s, the Hartlepool community welcomed a group of refugees who'd come for a new, safe start following the end of the Vietnam War. My mum was involved in a group effort to welcome those refugees by sharing traditions and customs, offering support, providing the basics you need when getting settled in. I tagged along just to play games and eat new food. Somewhere, there's a guy a decade or so younger than me, born into a family who resettled their lives from Vietnam to Hartlepool. They named him Gavin. Now, I'm proud of what my mum did for his family, for that to happen, but perhaps I should apologise. At least he wasn't called the name that my grandfather wanted to give me. Now, I know that not all communities, you can ask me about that later. Now, I know that not all communities have connections that are this strong. 3 decades of policing have taught me that. It did, however, show me from a very early age the impact of community, respect, and a basic level of kindness can have on others. To me, policing has a key role to play in binding society together, making connections, calming tensions, demonstrating reason before communities reach boiling point. When relations between communities and policing are themselves getting close to boiling point, that bond disintegrates. and what we say is not trusted and does not reassure. In recent events, I believe that public distrust in our service is one of the many reasons misinformation was able to spread so freely, allowing those intent on causing disorder to exploit simmering tensions and further divide us. Policing is wholly built on the trust and confidence of our communities, and we all know that we've lost ground. As a result, crimes go unsolved and communities are less safe. The trust between women and police has been badly eroded in recent years, and the confidence gap between policing and black communities undermines our efforts to protect them and keep them safe. What we do have are thousands of officers, staff and volunteers who are committed, motivated and intent on restoring faith in the uniform that I still wear with great pride. We need to support them better, with the equipment, technology and ways of working needed to succeed, especially when they are witnessing global challenges play out on their local streets. For the last 12 months, all Chief Constables have been discussing what needs to change to transform our service, better support our teams and bridge that gap, rebuilding the confidence that we've lost. In this room today, we have the people needed to lead a new era of policing. If we work well together over the coming months, our successors will thank us for it in the future, as will the public. Police reform has always been spoken and written about, and don't get me wrong, policing is changing all the time, with new initiatives frequently being developed to better protect the public and keep them safe, keeping pace with society as it changes. However, this evolutionary approach has only taken us so far. The world around us has changed beyond recognition, and yet we remain rooted in a system designed in the early 1960s, before mobile phones, the internet, even the M25, which came along 2 decades later. New technologies are accelerating criminal activities across borders, changing the requirements of policing and our local policing model entirely. For many years, the British policing model has been seen as one of excellence respected the world over, and that remains true of our fundamental principles. However, I look at the work being done by policing in other countries around the world and can see that some are advancing far more rapidly than we are, and we need to catch up. One thing that many of these countries have introduced is a national body to free local forces from needing to solve the problems that affect all of us. So following a year of discussion in Chief Constable's Council, we've now outlined the need for a national policing directorate with legal status that can lead the policing response to national threats, act as a focal point for working with governments, businesses and civil society groups on long-term prevention, negotiating better commercial deals for all of us, providing the technology and equipment that enables our local teams to succeed in the modern world. We've described how an organisation of this nature could provide strategic, operational and enabling capabilities on behalf of all police forces, doing so once and well, preventing duplication and, if sustained over the long term, enabling reinvestment into local policing where it is most needed. I'm also clear that it needs to be empowered to do so, with authority over disparate funding streams and the ability to make decisions at system level to help us protect our communities. Data will play a key part in informing those decisions. Sir Andy Marsh has been a long-term advocate for the need for data-driven police service, and I'd like to thank him for his leadership in this area. After our people, data is our most valuable asset. We can see around us that when used ethically, data is leading to a better understanding of what works and, just as importantly, what doesn't. Which is why, as part of a National Policing Directorate, we must draw together national policing data under common standards, allowing us to identify criminal activity, intercept it proactively, and highlight patterns of growing concern. It will also enable us to build the tools needed to combat advancing criminal tactics, not in a force-by-force manner, which is hugely expensive, but nationally, once and for all. Alongside this national approach, our policing model will always remain rooted at the local level. The brilliant women and men that make up our local forces will always be pivotal in ensuring that we can tackle local crime and respond swiftly to emergencies, protecting those most vulnerable and building the trust and confidence of communities. There is no technology or national service that can truly replicate the level of human empathy needed to do that and do it well. It's my belief, however, that by working smarter nationally, our colleagues will be far better equipped to do that. Police accountability will be central to any change we make. Policing needs clarity from government on how our performance will be judged and support from government on shared objectives with others who also have responsibility to keep the public safe. We need to redefine who's accountable at which level for which issues, as at present there are too many decision makers, which leads to inertia, indecision, or as I've heard it described, undecision, where we decide but then simply don't act. We must step carefully through these issues and ensure any reform is influenced and designed alongside our communities, particularly those with the least trust in us and in our service. If we do this change thoughtfully, if we do this change well, it will help us to build back trust in policing. So as I close, I'd like to return to the importance of strong communities. There's a Vietnamese proverb which translates to fire tests gold. It talks to how tough times test endurance. These past few years have been incredibly tough for policing and our communities. As a service, we have at times stood up to that test. On other occasions, we've fallen short of the mark. The next 2 days offer us a very rare opportunity to share ideas, debate and open discussion. Discussion that has real potential to drive meaningful, much-needed change. I make no exaggeration when I say this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for us to transform policing. The last one was 60 years ago. Let us not delay any longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gavin. I know we've got some roving microphones. We've got some time for just a few quick questions. If anybody'd like to raise their hands and wave at me, and we can get a microphone to you. And don't forget to put some questions through on the Slido app. But having listened to both of you, and of course those opening remarks both complement each other in very many ways. I mean, it does feel, and this is what we suspect we're going to hear from the Home Secretary, that this is a critical moment. Trepidation, excitement, how would you characterise that? You've outlined, Emily in particular, all of those challenges that were highlighted so specifically by the riots.
Well, absolutely, and I think, and Gavin alluded to it in his speech around, the world is changing. We are seeing so much more that policing is facing, which is beyond their borders, and international, global, the online space. There is a limit to what I think police forces can do on their own, because the boundaries that we're used to operating in don't exist anymore. And this is why I think we have to just really look at whether we can up our game. And as Gavin says, not every force needs to find their own local solution, because some of these things need to be challenged and worked on at a national level. And so having a way to coordinate that, I think, is going to be really important.
And we've got a new government. Labour haven't worked with PCCs before. How, from these early days yet, how would you characterise that relationship?
Well, I think we've worked hard to try and really highlight just the value of what PCCs are doing. I think, I highlighted in my speech some of the initiatives that have been really driven at a local level, the work that PCCs do to try and shine a spotlight on performance of local police forces, how are they responding to those local priorities. And I think actually the government recognised that we have a really important role to play in terms of that connection between local communities and what policing is doing. And whatever happens at a national level, it will always be felt at the local. So whatever happens, PCCs have got to be involved in that conversation, because we are the public voice in policing. So we've got to be able to provide that role.
Okay, I should say, of course, that the most asked question on Slido, I might be pulling your leg, is what you were nearly called, Gavin. Yeah. What was your grandfather's
Well, it was my great-grandfather wanted to call me Magnus.
Magnus Stevens.
Yeah.
You could have carried that off perfectly. I don't know why you were so worried about it. Send me some questions. Give me a wave if you've got any opening thoughts on what you've heard. Gavin, it's interesting. It's rooting change within communities against a global backdrop. Yeah. I mean, it's that scale of trying to serve communities who may not even be digitally connected fully, feel totally separated, no trust in policing, against a backdrop of a constant globally sort of evolving threat level, frankly. And it's that tension that I suppose what we've got to explore today.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a worrying time, not least because the financial challenge for all public services and for policing over the next few years looks pretty stark. But we've got some wonderful strengths on which we can build. So Emily and I have both mentioned one of them this morning, building on local policing, which is respected the world over, and when we do it well, it can be absolutely excellent. We can also see that the science and technology, the innovation that's coming through local forces, the work that the Office of our Chief Scientific Advisor is doing, that is wonderful. And if you add that to a really engaged and committed workforce, we've got a lot going for us. But the real problem I would describe as one of agility. The way the system is currently geared, we simply can't move fast enough to keep up with the threats. And I think that's the thing that we need to change.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we'll be looking at in that first session critically as well. And it's interesting that you were outlining very clearly there what you'd like to see in a national policing headquarters. From the sort of headlines that we've already seen issued from the Home Office, are they being ambitious enough with it, do you think?
Well, I think it's possible to look around the globe and see where colleagues have tried to solve the same problems that we're solving, and that gives you some indication as to the scale of ambition that you could have for a national service. And I think it's important for us to discuss what that could be. But there's some very easy building blocks that we ought to start with. Those services that have become fragmented over recent years, distributed throughout policing, just need to be drawn together and done once for everybody. And I think there's quite a strong consensus on some of those things. What the big vision is for the future, that's definitely something that we need to debate.
Yeah, there'll be lots to come on that. I've had everybody's getting going on Slido, which is great to see. Simon Mear, and it's actually going to be my next question, so it's a great leaping off point. Simon Mear says, how can local forces and communities trust national bodies? Don't you think we need to know the credentials or the body of work of individuals who will ultimately lead? I mean, we know that we're going to get details of a new Home Office performance unit. I mean, there is potential, presumably, that you have another layer of bureaucracy and big questions about who's actually engaged, who's actually leading it.
Well, I think this is why you have to get the governance right. You have to make sure you've got, and I think we've all said this, we're going to have to, as part of the discussion, agree what's done nationally, what's done regionally, what's done locally. And I think we can't do this from the centre. It can't be a few people, sitting in London saying, well, actually, this is what we want to do. We've got to do it with everybody in this room. And we've got to be very clear about what the governance piece is to give people confidence around how decisions are being made and make sure that actually they feel they have the space to shape what those decisions look like so that ultimately when the decision is made, people are satisfied they've had that process. But I think getting that governance piece right is going to be key. So then whatever comes on board later on, if the governance is strong enough, it will ultimately work.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd say is that we are policing. So we've already been talking to the Home Office about any sort of performance centre within the Home Office. Ideally should be staffed by people from local forces and PCC's office, by colleagues who work in the inspectorate, in the college, in other national agencies, to bring them together in a shared endeavour. Whatever any new national body might be, it will ultimately be made up of people that come from local policing. So we're definitely in this together.
Question from Teresa Ashforth. Gavin talked about people being our most valuable asset, your most valuable asset. How do we sell policing as an attractive career so we can attract and retain the brightest minds? And I was looking at some of the figures on this. I mean, there's a sort of 20% attrition rate with those who are joining as junior officers.
Yeah, I mean, look, policing is really tough. The one thing that I think we ought to remind ourselves, though, is that we recruited 47,000 new colleagues during the pandemic, and nigh on 250,000 people applied to join policing. So there's no shortage of public spirit out there that wants to come in and serve their communities. In terms of retention, I think we need to get much more porous across our different organisations to make it easier for people to move between. Because I think if we offered really strong career pathways in and amongst the many and various bodies that we've got, then that gives people an alternative when they're ready for a break in what can sometimes be a really tough gig.
And I suppose you see it at a really granular level with the police officers that working under all sorts of pressures, that very exhausted workforce that got to the end of the summer having navigated through the riots.
And I think that's it. I think, you know, it's been hugely tough for police officers and police staff. They have faced just incredible challenges. The thing I'm always struck with, though, when I go out and I speak to officers is just how much they just go, it's just the job. It's what we do. You know, your rest days get cancelled, but we do it because we serve the community. One of the things I think we need to get better at talking about is recognising that contribution. We know there are areas for improvement. We know there are things that still need to change. And unfortunately, we see every week there are headlines around officers who maybe haven't behaved the way we'd like them to. But we need to get better, I think, at talking about the brilliant work that officers do. In Merseyside, we had our Police Community First Awards a couple of weeks ago, and it was just so wonderful to hear about the amazing contribution that they are making that we don't talk about enough and celebrate enough. And I think we want to recognise that, you know, in very small ways, officers can have a huge impact, not just in kind of big riot situations.
Yeah, so I was just going to say on that, I think the two biggest things that power policing are compassion and goodwill. And I think if you continually attack policing's compassion and goodwill, then it's detrimental for all of us.
Joseph Stokoe, I remember that name from last year. That stayed in my brain. Who would be politically responsible for the National Policing Directorate?
Well, that's a question that we need to debate.
Sector.
Clearly, it needs to be politically accountable. It needs to drive decision-making at the national level, and we need to think carefully about that. Interestingly, when been talking to colleagues in different jurisdictions around the world, one of the things that they said, that the thing that occupied most of their parliamentary time in the setup of their national policing bodies was exactly that sort of question. Where does the power lie? Who gets to decide on what? How should it be governed and accountable?
Okay, we've got a question from Susie Cousins, which is asked to both of you. Do you believe the Labour government ambition to halve violence against women and girls in the next 10 years is achievable? What do the police need to support this to happen?
I think it's definitely achievable if the will is there and also the funding. I think we have to start talking about tackling violence against women and girls like we talk organised crime and counter-terrorism. I think we need to see the same level of investment, which I think is one of the things that we are talking about as part of this reform piece. I also think, though, and this is something, again, that we're talking about a lot when we're in these meetings, is it's not just about the police. We have to recognise that we are part of a bigger community. So tackling violence against women and girls, the police cannot do this on their own. We have to get upstream. We have to look at the prevention piece. We have to look at challenging attitudes. We have to talk to education. A lot of the work that PCCs are driving locally is funding programmes around bystander awareness, around culture change, tackling attitudes around misogyny. You know, we have to look at it as a whole piece. So I think it's not just going to be for the Home Secretary to drive this. It's got to be everybody in government if we're really going to see success in that space. Yeah,
just a quick practical example of that. Yesterday, Serena and I were on a call with our Chief Scientific Advisor, Paul Taylor, and the Chief Scientific Advisor for the Department for Education, talking about exactly this issue. What is it about the harmful content online that's changing the minds, the behaviour of our children and young people and leading to criminal, pretty awful criminal behaviour later in life. So if we're to take on a problem for society that's this big, everybody needs to be in that problem-solving activity.
Okay, just time for one more, I think. Rich Walker, in other sectors like healthcare, excuse me, hundreds of millions of pounds are being spent on unifying data. Do we envisage a proportionately commensurate level of commitment in policing? And I suppose, do you think we need it?
Well, I think we're on the cusp of new technology that will allow us to get insight from our data without the need to physically have to join these things together or pool it together. So I think if we get the right expertise and technical advice, and there are some great examples of where this is working now, in the Eastern Regional Organised Crime Unit would be one of them, then I think we're on the cusp of being able to do this a lot more easily than we have in the past.
Okay, thank you. And I will just squeeze one more in, because actually, when we're talking about policing futures and looking ahead to trying to improve matters, particularly at community level, Keith Fraser, from the chair of the Youth Justice Board, positive opening addresses from both of you. Under 18s are disproportionately involved in disorder. Any work being done to understand why?
Well, there will absolutely be. And again, I think that's driven by, there'll be lots of local conversations around how do we better, you know, divert young people away? How do we not criminalise them? How do we give them, you know, better paths out of criminal justice? But again, I think it's very patchwork in different areas will have different approaches. And some of the work we want to see is, well, actually all forces are seeing this challenge. So what can we be doing more of at a national level that really invests in young people, that gives them opportunity, puts them on a better path, and then stops them ever getting kind of into that criminal justice cycle?
All costs, doesn't it? Well,
It does cost, yeah.
It all costs.
But you should save the cost down the line. You know what I mean? It's a big investment up front, but if you get it right, then you reduce that supply into criminal justice, and then the costs get put back around, which is why it can't be done by policing on its own.
That's interesting, and I know that that's being addressed absolutely square on by one of our think tank speakers later, so it's a perfect leaping off point for that. I know we'll see you through the course of the next 2 days. I know you'll be introducing the Home Secretary a bit later, Emily. But for now, Gavin and Emily, thank you very much indeed. We'll let you leave and then we'll bring on the next panel. Thank you.